They found her kneeling in the snow. Torchlight clawed at the darkness beyond the stronghold walls, casting the courtyard in restless amber and deep shadow. The gates had barely closed behind the patrol when the whispers began low, urgent, spreading pack to pack, like frost across still water. The outcast girl. She has the prince. Katerina did not look up when the circle of warriors tightened around her. She did not raise her hands. She did not speak. She only pressed her lips to the small wolf cub's forehead and held him closer. His dark fur was damp with fever. His breathing came in shallow, broken pulls, the kind that made seasoned warriors look away. He couldn't have been more than a few months shifted, barely old enough to hold his wolf shape for more than an hour. And yet here he was, small and trembling, curled against the chest of a girl the entire territory had been told to despise. A single tear slipped down Katerina's cheek, not from fear, from the desperate arithmetic of someone counting breaths and running out of numbers. Step away from him. The words didn't arrive like a command. They arrived like a verdict. Alpha Eric Valdmir descended the stone steps of the stronghold with the measured certainty of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He was broad-shouldered and battle-scarred, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that moved with the wind like the wing of something ancient and undefeated. The blade in his hand black iron, long, curved, etched with the names of every challenger who had tested him and lost, was already drawn. His eyes had shifted to molten gold. The pack fell silent the moment he appeared. Katerina finally looked up. What she saw was not a man in that moment. It was authority made flesh, 6.5 feet of hardened grief and iron will, every line of him carved by a life spent defending territory with blood. He was looking at her the way men looked at things they intended to destroy before they could cause further damage. She held the cub tighter. She was found at the east border, the council elder Halvard announced, stepping forward with the particular eagerness of a man who had been waiting years for an opportunity exactly like this one. His voice carried across the courtyard, performing for the assembled warriors as much as informing the Alpha. Near the old river crossing, Prince Leif collapsed within the hour of her being sighted there. Murmurs rippled through the pack. She cursed him. A warrior, near the back, certain, loud. She's been cursed herself. Her parents were cast out for the same dark practices. The crops near her settlement failed 3 seasons running. She was seen gathering river herbs at dusk. Katerina heard all of it. She had been hearing versions of all of it her entire life. She did not defend herself. There was no point defending yourself to a crowd that had already decided. She had learned that lesson at 15, standing in almost this exact courtyard, watching the council sign her exile, with less ceremony than they used to approve a hunting route. She focused on the cub. Breathe, she urged him silently. Just keep breathing. Eric descended the final step and crossed the courtyard slowly, blade raised. The warriors parted for him without a word. When he stopped, the tip of his weapon hovered less than a foot from her throat. She did not flinch. His gold eyes burned down at her, searching for guilt, she supposed, or fear. He was used to finding both. You were seen near the river, he said. His voice was low and controlled, which somehow made it worse than shouting. My son was found ill within the hour. You are packless. You are outcast. And you are holding my child. He let that sit for a moment. Give me one reason, he continued, why I should not end this now. Katerina lifted her eyes to his, and in the torchlight, with snow beginning to fall soft and relentless around them, she said the only true thing that mattered. He's dying. The blade did not lower, but Eric's jaw tightened a fractional shift, the kind only someone watching very carefully would catch, because she wasn't wrong. The cub's breath rattled weakly in the silence that followed. If you take him from me now, Katerina whispered, her voice steady despite the cold seeping through her thin clothing, despite the weapon at her throat, despite the entire weight of a hostile pack pressing in around her, he will not see sunrise. The blade remained raised, but Eric did not move forward, and in the frost-bitten stillness of that courtyard, with torches burning and snow falling, and a dying cub pressed against the heart of an outcast girl, that was the moment everything changed. Before we continue, please hit the subscribe and like button and tell me which city you're tuning in from. I love to know where this story found you. Now, let's dive in. She had survived the border wilds for 3 years, on nothing but old knowledge and stubbornness. She had survived the exile that should have broken her. But surviving the Alpha's blade required something she had never once been given, the chance to be believed, and that, like everything else in Katarina's life, would have to be earned in blood. They took her inside, not out of mercy. Out of practicality, the pack healer had taken one look at Leif's darkening veins in the open courtyard and gone pale enough to match the snow. Whatever was spreading through the cub, it was moving fast, and cold air was not helping. So they brought Katarina into the great hall, surrounded on all sides by warriors who kept their hands on their weapons. And they made her kneel on the stone floor beside the fire while the healers worked. She watched them fail. She had known they would. She recognized frost rot the moment she'd seen the dark threads climbing Leif's small paws, recognized it the way you recognize a language you were taught in secret, in whispers, by people the world later decided were criminals. Her mother had shown her once. See the pattern, Carrie, like roots growing inward instead of out. The cold doesn't just take the body, it takes the spirit first. Her mother. Katarina pressed the memory down hard before it could surface fully. This was not the time. She had been 15 when the council signed the order. Her parents were gone by then, her father first, her mother 3 months later, both taken by a fever that swept the border settlements the winter Katarina turned 14. The pack healers had tried and failed. Her mother, in her final weeks, had turned to older methods, remedies passed down through Omega lineages that predated the current pack structure, back when healers were respected rather than suspected. The crops near their cabin failed that same season. Coincidence, Katarina had always believed. A bad frost, soil exhaustion, the kind of misfortune that accumulated in border territories where the land was harder and the resources thinner. The council had decided otherwise. Forbidden practices, environmental corruption, bloodline taint. They'd given her 3 days to gather what she could carry and walk east until the territory markers were behind her. No one had said goodbye. A few had watched from doorways with expressions that might have been guilt. If guilt required any courage to act on, it hadn't broken her. It had, instead, made her very good at surviving alone. And in the 3 years since, alone in the border woods with nothing but her mother's journal and whatever she could learn from observation and error, she had become something the council's tidy vocabulary didn't have a word for. Someone who actually knew how to heal. It's not working. The head healer's voice cut through the firelit hall, tight with controlled panic. He stepped back from Leif, who lay now on a low bench near the hearth, his small chest rising and falling in uneven intervals. The dark veins had climbed past his elbows. His fur, where it pushed through in patches along his forearms, was matted with cold sweat. Eric stood 10 feet away, blade still in hand, utterly motionless. Katarina had been watching him more than she'd been watching the healers. She recognized the particular stillness of a powerful person confronting something power could not fix. His jaw was locked. His gold eyes tracked every movement near his son, with an intensity that was almost painful to witness. He was terrified. He was also furious. And the two were fighting each other visibly. He turned that gaze on her. "Explain," he said. One word. The weight of a much longer sentence behind it. Katarina kept her voice even. It's frost rot. A spiritual sickness carried in river ice, the kind that forms over underground currents in deep winter. When a young wolf breaks through unexpectedly, the cold shock doesn't just chill the body. She paused. It fractures the wolf spirit, and frost rot feeds on that fracture, on the fear left behind. Silence. You expect me, Eric said slowly, to believe you have diagnosed what 3 trained healers could not identify. I expect you, Katarina said quietly, to look at your son. He looked. Life convulsed. It was violent and sudden, his whole small body seizing against the bench, a sound escaping him that didn't belong in any child. 2 healers lunged forward. Katarina was already moving, crossing the space between them before anyone could stop her, pressing her hands firm and steady against the cub's chest. Hold on, she said under her breath. Not to the room, to him. Behind her, She heard the soft, heavy sound of a large man dropping to one knee. She did not need to turn to know the blade was lower. She didn't ask permission. There was no time for permission. Leif's small body had gone rigid beneath her hands, his breathing reduced to something thin and desperate, and Katerina could feel the frost rot the way her mother had taught her to feel it, not with her palms, but deeper than that. A cold that had roots. A cold that was feeding. She did the only thing she knew would reach it. She began to hum. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It rose from somewhere low in her chest, quiet and unhurried, the way her mother used to begin it, as if the song had always been present in the room, and she was simply making it audible. An ancient Omega lullaby, older than the stronghold's stone walls, older than pack law, older than the divide between those who healed and those who ruled. It had no words. It had never needed them. It was warmth given a shape that the body could receive. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the glow appeared. It began beneath her palms, faint, amber gold, the color of firelight seen through closed eyelids. It pulsed gently with the rhythm of the song, spreading in slow, soft increments across Leif's chest, like sunrise moving across frost. The nearest warrior stumbled backward. "What is she?" "Witchcraft." Halvard's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. The council elder shoved forward through the ring of stunned warriors, his face flushed with the particular outrage of a man who considered himself the final authority on everything dangerous. "Stop her. Stop her now. She is using forbidden." "No one moves." Eric's voice. It landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, and every person present went immediately, instinctively still. Even Halvard. Katerina didn't open her eyes. She kept humming. The glow deepened. "It feeds on fear." Her voice came out soft, threaded through the melody, as though speaking and humming were not separate things right now. Frost rot isn't a sickness the way you understand sickness. It doesn't attack the body first. It finds the wound, the cold, left in the spirit, and it widens it. She could feel the room listening. She kept her focus on Leif. He fell through ice. Not a question. She had seen the shape of it in the sickness's pattern, the sudden shock of submersion, the animal panic, the wolf instinct slamming shut like a door against the cold. He went under unexpectedly, and when he came up, part of his wolf stayed frozen down there, a beat of silence. He snuck to the river. Eric's voice, behind her, low, stripped of its authority by something raw underneath. The frost rot found that fear and planted itself in it. Katerina continued. "The more afraid he is, the more afraid everyone around him is, the faster it spreads." She paused. "Your healers are skilled." But everything they tried came with urgency, with alarm. He could feel it. Every treatment confirmed to his wolf that something was terribly wrong. She finally said the thing that mattered most. "He needs someone unafraid." The silence that followed was a different kind than the ones before it. She heard Eric exhale a single, controlled breath that told her everything. She didn't need to see his face. She had watched him in the courtyard, in the great hall, at his son's side, had watched the iron precision of a man who commanded thousands, and she had seen what lived underneath it. The great Alpha was terrified, not of her, not of the council, not of anything a blade could address, of losing his son. And that terror, however human, however understandable, was making Leif worse. The glow beneath her hands brightened. Leif's rigid body softened by degrees, the terrible locked tension releasing like ice, giving way to a slow thaw. His breathing deepened, uneven still, but fuller. The dark veins along his pores had stopped their crawl toward his chest. A sound moved through the warriors. Not panic this time, something closer, to awe. Katerina felt the warmth leaving her. It was gradual at first, a gentle drain, like water finding a lower level, then less gradual. She had known this would happen. She had known it the moment she recognized the sickness for what it was. Frost rot didn't simply stop. It had to go somewhere. The cold began at her wrists. She looked down. Dark threads, delicate as cracks in river ice, traced their way beneath her skin. She kept humming. No one spoke. The great hall, which had moments ago been crowded with argument and accusation, and the restless energy of armed men looking for someone to blame, had gone completely still. Every warrior, every council elder, every healer who had failed all of them, watching the silver-haired girl kneeling on the stone floor with her hands pressed to the dying prince's chest, and dark veins climbing her wrists like ink, spreading through. Water. Katerina kept humming. The cold was deeper now. It had moved past her wrists, threading upward along her forearms in slow, deliberate lines. She recognized the sensation, not pain, exactly, but a kind of hollowing, as though warmth were a substance she possessed in finite supply, and the frost rot was simply collecting what she owed. She had known this was the cost. She had chosen it anyway. The glow between her palms and Leif's chest held steady, soft gold, unwavering. The rhythm of it locked to the lullaby she continued to hum under her breath. And slowly, achingly slowly, the visible signs began to shift. The dark veins along the cub's small arms were retreating. Not quickly, not dramatically, but retreating. Steam rose from his fur, thin wisps of it, curling upward in the firelit air, as though something frozen deep in his tissue was finally, reluctantly, beginning to melt. "She's taking it." One of the warriors said it quietly, almost to himself, with the tone of a man reporting something he didn't have a framework to understand. The sickness. She's pulling it out of him, and it's going into her. "Then let it." Halvard's voice, sharp and immediate. "She is outcast. She is nothing. If the sickness takes her, the territory loses nothing of." Halvard. Alvard. Eric didn't shout. He never needed to. The elder went silent. Eric crossed the distance between himself and Katerina in 4 strides, dropping to one knee beside her. This close, she could feel the heat radiating off him, the contained intensity of a man built for war now utterly helpless against something no blade could reach. He looked at her wrists, at the dark lines climbing steadily toward her elbows. "Stop." The word came out rougher than he'd perhaps intended. "You'll die." Katerina didn't open her eyes. "Better me," she said simply. "You are not." He stopped, started again. "You don't owe him this. You owe this pack nothing." She almost smiled at that. "Almost. I know," she said, and kept humming. The steam rising from Leif thickened. The last of the dark veins along his pores faded to nothing, absorbed into the channels now mapped across Katerina's forearms. Her breathing had grown shallow. She could feel that, distantly, the way you feel weather changing before it arrives. The drain was accelerating. The frost rot was larger than she'd estimated, more deeply rooted. It had had hours to settle into the cub's spirit. She paid the difference. Her song wavered once. She steadied it. Eric's hand moved not toward his blade this time, but hovering at the edge of her shoulder, uncertain. The gesture of a man whose instincts were screaming to act, and who had nothing useful to do. She could feel the restraint in him like a held breath. "Why?" he said quietly, not quite a question. The anger had gone out of it. She didn't have the breath to answer. Life steered. It began in his fingers, a small, reflexive curl, the unconscious movement of a child reaching for something familiar in sleep. Then his breathing changed, deepening from that thin, rattling shallowness into something that filled his chest properly, completely, like a room being opened after a long winter. The steam dissipated. His color returned. His eyes, his father's eyes, that same molten gold, though softer, younger, unclouded by years of authority and loss, fluttered open. He looked up at the ceiling. Then, slowly, to the side, his voice came out small and wondering, and absolutely certain. "Father?" The blade hit stone. The sound rang through the hall, clean and final. Iron on ancient rock, echoing up into the rafters and back down again, before fading into a silence that felt nothing like the silences before it. Eric's breath left him in a single, shattered exhale. He reached for his son. Behind them, Katerina swayed. For a moment, no one moved. Eric knelt on the stone floor with his son clutched against his chest, alive, breathing, the fever gone as though it had never been, and the hall held its breath around him. Leif's small fingers gripped his father's cloak with surprising strength. His eyes were closing again, drawn back towards sleep by the exhaustion of recovery. But it was the sleep of a healing child now, not a dying one. Worlds apart. Then Katerina collapsed. She went sideways without a sound, the last of her strength simply spent, and Eric caught her before she reached the floor. Purely instinct, the same reflex that had made him reach for his blade hours ago, now made him reach for her. She was lighter than he expected. Her skin, where his hand met her forearm, was cold. The dark veins had climbed to her collarbone. He looked at her face. Whatever he saw there, he kept it behind his expression. The council arrived the way councils always arrived to crises they hadn't controlled loudly, and slightly too late. Halvard led them, 6 elders at his back, all of them reading the room in an instant and immediately misreading it. They saw the blade on the floor. They saw the unconscious girl in the Alpha's arms. They saw the warriors standing in uncertain silence and the healers who had no explanation for what they'd just witnessed. They saw opportunity. She must be executed. Halvard's voice filled the hall with practiced authority. He stopped at a deliberate distance from Eric, close enough to be heard, far enough to feel safe. The girl used forbidden energy within these walls. In the presence of the air, whatever appeared to occur, we cannot allow. She saved him. Eric's voice was quiet. Halvard continued as though he hadn't heard. We cannot allow the pack to believe that outcast magic is to be tolerated, that boundaries exist to be. She saved him. The repetition was not louder. It was slower. And somehow, that was worse. Halvard stopped. The hall was very still. Eric rose to his feet in a single motion. Katerina held against his chest, Leif's small hand still loosely tangled in his cloak. He looked at the council the way he looked at things that had recently become problems. He was deciding how to solve. Your healers worked on my son for 2 hours, he said. They tried every method they knew, every poultice, every rite. A pause. This girl walked in from the cold and did what none of them could. She used forbidden. She used knowledge. Something shifted in his expression, not anger exactly, but the thing that lives just beneath it, when a man has made a decision and is done pretending the conversation is still open. Knowledge your council banned because you didn't understand it, and chose fear over curiosity. Halvard's jaw tightened. Magic like hers threatens the order of this. No. The word landed like a door closing. Your fear threatens order. Eric's gold eyes moved across the assembled council faces, unhurried, giving each of them a moment to understand that he was speaking directly to them. I have watched this council call things forbidden for 30 years. I have watched you name curses, what were simply methods you couldn't control. You banished her parents for healing practices that tonight saved my son's life. He looked down briefly at Katerina's pale face. And you banished her for surviving it. Murmurs moved through the warriors, uncertain at first, then less uncertain. A younger warrior near the back lowered his weapon entirely. Then another. Halvard looked around the room and did not like what he saw. Alpha, the law is clear. I am the law. No heat in it. Just fact. And I am invoking Alpha authority. He straightened. This girl is under my protection. She will recover within these walls. No one raises a hand against her. No one speaks her name with contempt. His gaze settled on Halvard and stayed there. Any who disagree may bring their grievance to the yard. Silence. Complete and absolute. No one moved toward the yard. Eric walked toward the inner chambers. The warriors parted without being asked. At the threshold, he paused, not turning back. Behind him, on the cold stone floor where it had fallen, his blade remained. He did not go back for it. She didn't wake on the first day, or the second. On the third morning, snow fell again beyond the narrow window of the main chamber, soft, indifferent. The same snow that had been falling the night they dragged her through the gates. Eric sat beside the bed in a chair that had not been designed for sitting in for long periods, which he had now been doing for the better part of 70 hours. He told himself it was vigilance. A practical matter. The frost veins had receded from her neck by the end of the first day, retreating back toward her wrists, and the pack healer had said cautiously, very cautiously, in the tone of a man revising everything he thought he knew, that he believed she would recover. Believed. The word of a man who no longer trusted his own certainty. On the subject of this particular girl, Eric understood the feeling. Leif sat on the floor beside the bed, chin propped on the mattress edge, watching Katarina's face with the focused patience of a child who had decided something and saw no reason to negotiate. He had been removed from the room twice. He had returned both times within the hour, silent and immovable, a small fixed point of will that Eric recognized as entirely his own fault. The boy had inherited it from somewhere. "She's still sleeping," Leif observed, on the morning of the third day. "Yes, she was sleeping yesterday too. Yes." The cub considered this. "Is she going to keep sleeping forever?" "No." Leif looked at his father's face with the unsettling perceptiveness of children who have recently survived something and emerged from it more serious. "You're worried." Eric said nothing. Outside the chamber walls, the pack whispered. He could hear the shape of it, even from here, the specific murmur of people building a story. He caught fragments through servants and guards who couldn't quite keep the wonder from their faces. She absorbed the winter itself. The frost veins were gone from the cub and on her skin within minutes. The alpha dropped his blade. The story was already bigger than the event, acquiring detail and dimension the way all legends did when they found willing mouths. He didn't stop it. He wasn't sure he could have. She woke just before midday. He saw it happen, the subtle shift from stillness to presence, her breathing changing, her fingers moving slightly against the furs. Her eyes opened slowly and found the ceiling first, then the window, then him. She stared at him for a long moment, with the careful expression of someone assembling where they were and how they'd arrived there. "You should have let me die," she said. Her voice came out rough and thin, scraped clean by 3 days of silence. "You should have let me die," she said. Her voice came out rough and thin, scraped clean by 3 days of silence. "That wasn't a choice I was willing to make. It wasn't your choice." A pause. "I made it for myself. In my hall," he said, using a method my council will spend the next several months trying to have outlawed, which makes it, administratively, somewhat my problem. Something moved across her face that wasn't quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. It faded quickly, replaced by something more careful. "Leif," she said, "is he fully recovered?" Eric's voice shifted on those 2 words just slightly, just enough. "He has been in this room since yesterday morning. We've had some disagreement about that." She turned her head, found the small wolf cub watching her from the mattress edge, with enormous golden eyes. Something cracked open quietly in her expression. She looked at Leif the way people look at things they hadn't let themselves hope for. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," said Leif. Then, with great seriousness, "I stayed. I see that. Father stayed too. The whole time." A beat of silence. Eric did not look at his son. Katarina looked at Eric instead, a question somewhere in it that she didn't ask aloud. He met her gaze steadily and offered nothing, which was itself a kind of answer. "You gave me my son," he said quietly. "Whatever you believe about what you deserved, that is what happened, and I don't forget debts." She absorbed that in silence. Down the corridor, Eric knew. Halvard was meeting with the other council elders, in a room with a closed door. He knew the shape of that conversation too, had felt it forming since the night he'd left his blade on the floor. That particular problem was coming, but it could wait until she was strong enough to stand. Leif reached out and patted Katarina's hand with great solemnity. "I made up a name for you," he announced. She looked at him. "Did you?" "Warmheart," he said, as though this were simply factual. Because you were warm even when you were cold. The thing that moved across Katerina's face then was not adjacent to a smile. It was one. The rumors began, as rumors always did, with a kernel of truth wrapped in so many layers of retelling that the original fact became almost unrecognizable. By the end of the first week, the story circulating through the stronghold was that Katerina had walked through the gates already glowing, that the frost rot had fled from her touch like something alive and frightened, that the Alpha had knelt before her in the courtyard. By the second week, a version had emerged in which she had called the golden light, deliberately, wielded it like a weapon, bended the sickness to her will with the ease of long practice. By the third week, 3 separate families from the outer settlements had arrived at the stronghold gates, asking quietly, carefully, if the healer was receiving visitors. She was. Katerina hadn't planned it. The first had been a mother with a child running a persistent fever that the pack healers had addressed twice without lasting effect. The woman had waited in the corridor outside the chamber door for the better part of a morning before one of the younger guards, apparently deciding that waiting was worse than asking, had knocked and told Katerina she had a visitor. She'd seen the child. She'd known the remedy within minutes. Common frost chill, nothing spiritual, easily addressed with the right herb preparation and a specific sleeping position that kept the airways clear. The mother had wept with relief. Word traveled faster than Katerina would have liked. The crops were harder to explain away. It had started as rumor too. Someone passing through the eastern border settlements reported that the fields near Katerina's abandoned cabin, the same fields the council had cited for 3 years as evidence of her corrupting influence, had shown unexpected growth. Winter herbs pushing through frost in patches, soil that had been dense and grey loosening at the edges, as though something that had been holding its breath had finally exhaled. Halvard brought this to Eric's attention, with the manner of a man presenting evidence at a trial he had already decided the verdict of. The council came to Eric's private hall on a Tuesday morning, all 6 of them, arranged in the particular formation that meant they had agreed on their position before entering the room. Eric was standing at the window when they arrived. He didn't turn around immediately. He let them settle. Let the silence do its preliminary work. "She needs to go," Halvard said, dispensing with approach entirely. "Once she is well enough to travel, back to the border, or further it makes no difference. But she cannot remain inside these walls. She is healing members of this pack," Eric said, still facing the window. "She is accumulating influence within this pack." Halvard's voice sharpened. "Warriors speak of her with reverence. Families seek her counsel. There are those who now question whether pack healers are adequate." A weighted pause. "And there are whispers, Alpha, that her presence affects your judgment." Eric turned then. Halvard held his gaze with the confidence of a man who had spent decades learning exactly how far he could push before the edge arrived. "We are not questioning your authority. We are protecting it. The pack cannot have 2 centers of gravity. She is one recovering woman in a guest chamber. She is the girl who made you drop your blade in front of every warrior in this territory." Halvard let that sit. Perception is power. You know this better than anyone. Eric said nothing for a long moment. "I'll consider it," he said finally, which meant the meeting was over. He found Katerina in the eastern corridor that evening, well enough now to move through the stronghold in slow, careful circuits that she'd told Leif, who reported everything, were to rebuild her strength. She knew he was coming. She didn't pretend otherwise. "The council wants me gone," she said, before he could speak. "They do." She nodded, unsurprised, watching the torchlight on the stone wall. "Why did you do it?" he asked. The real question, the one that had been sitting beneath every other conversation. "You owed this pack nothing. You said so yourself." She was quiet for a moment. "Because no one protected me when I needed it," she said simply. "And I decided a long time ago that I wouldn't become that someone who lets fear make that choice for them." Eric looked at her profile in the torchlight. Something in his expression shifted in a way the council would not have liked at all. 3 days later, Halvard filed for a formal challenge to Alpha Authority. The formal challenge was announced at dawn. Halvard had done it correctly, Eric would give him that. The Elder had followed every procedural requirement with meticulous precision. which meant the challenge could not be dismissed on technical grounds. The ancient rite existed for legitimate reasons, forged in an era when alphas had occasionally needed to be stopped. It required a public gathering, a formal statement of grievance, and a verdict rendered before the assembled pack. It had been invoked twice in Eric's lifetime. Both times, the alpha in question had lost. The courtyard filled by mid-morning, not just warriors' families, settlers from the outer rings who had traveled since before dawn, healers, elders, the mothers of young wolves who had been brought to Katarina's corridor in recent weeks and sent home with remedies that worked. They gathered in the cold with the specific energy of people who understood that something was being decided and had opinions about it. Katarina stood near the inner doors with Leif's hand tucked firmly in hers. She had told him 3 times that he didn't need to be here. He had explained, with the immovable logic of a 7-year-old who had recently been brought back from the edge of death, that he disagreed. She hadn't argued a 4th time. Eric stood at the center of the courtyard, the same stone ground where his blade had fallen weeks ago. He wore no ceremonial armor, no weapons. He had come as he was, which Katarina suspected was itself a statement, though she couldn't yet read its full meaning. Halvard ascended the speaking steps with all 6 council elders arranged behind him like a wall. "We invoke the right of pack reckoning," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the gathered crowd. "It is the council's assertion that Alpha Eric Valdmir has demonstrated compromised judgment in matters of pack safety, that he has granted protection to a practitioner of forbidden arts, that he has allowed outcast influence to penetrate the heart of this territory." He paused for effect. "And that in doing so, he has endangered the traditions that keep this pack intact." Murmurs through the crowd, some affirming, more uncertain. "The verdict is simple," Halvard continued. "The outcast is exiled permanently and irrevocably. Pack law is restored, or the alpha defends his choice in the yard." He looked at Eric. "What say you?" The courtyard went very still. Eric looked at the ground for a moment, at the specific patch of stone where his blade had struck and rung out and gone silent. Then he looked up. "I won't fight you," he said. A ripple through the crowd. Halvard's expression sharpened with something that looked close to triumph. "Then you concede." "I won't fight you," Eric repeated, "because this isn't a question that a blade answers. You've made it about tradition, about order, about what this pack is supposed to fear." He turned slightly, addressing not just the council now, but the gathered faces beyond them. "So let me tell you what I know about fear." He had the attention of every person in that courtyard. "I know what it looked like on my son's face when he stopped breathing. I know what it felt like to stand over him with a blade and understand that nothing I had built, nothing I had conquered, not one scar on my body meant anything at all in that moment." His voice remained even, controlled, but something beneath it was not. "And I know who walked into that hall and did what none of us could." Silence. "Strength without mercy," he said, his weakness disguised. "I believed otherwise for a long time. This pack has believed otherwise for longer than that." He looked directly at Halvard. "She didn't curse this territory. She survived it, and then she saved it. Those are not the actions of something to be feared." A long moment passed. Then one of the pack healers stepped forward from the crowd. An older woman, grey-haired, with the weathered hands of someone who had practiced her craft for decades. "She succeeded where I failed," the healer said simply. "I will not pretend otherwise." Another step forward, a mother, holding a small child against her hip, a child who had been feverish a week ago. Then another, and another. Halvard watched his majority walk away from him in 1s and 2s, and there was nothing in the procedural framework of the ancient rite of pack reckoning that accounted for this particular outcome. The challenge required pack support to proceed. By the time the movement stopped, he didn't have it. In the doorway, Leif squeezed Katarina's hand. She squeezed back and said nothing, and watched the courtyard, where everything had begun finally, irrevocably, change. Spring came slowly, the way it always did in the northern territories, not as an arrival but as a gradual loosening. Frost, giving ground by degrees, the light lasting a little longer each evening, until one morning you noticed the snow along the southern wall had gone, and couldn't remember exactly when it had happened. Leaf noticed first. He noticed most things first. "The river ice is breaking," he announced at breakfast, with the authority of someone delivering important intelligence. "I heard it from the east tower. It makes a cracking sound." He looked at Katerina across the table. "Can we go see it?" "Not alone," Eric said, without looking up. Obviously not alone. Katerina would come. A pause, perfectly calibrated. "And you?" Eric did look up then. Katerina was looking at her bowl with the careful expression of someone not participating in a negotiation they were nonetheless central to. "After the council review," Eric said. Leif accepted this with the patience of someone who had learned that after the council review was the closest thing to yes he was likely to get before midday. The formal welcome happened on the first genuinely warm afternoon in the main hall with the doors open to let in the light. It was not a ceremony of claiming. Eric had been explicit about that with the council, with the pack elders, with anyone who had attempted to frame it otherwise. The old traditions offered two categories for a woman brought inside pack walls, claimed mate or ward, both of which implied ownership of one kind or another. Eric had invoked alpha authority for the third time in as many months and created a third category, pack chosen, invited by merit, belonging to no one, protected by all. Halvard had retired from the council the previous week, citing his health. No one had pressed the matter. When the elder who replaced him read the formal declaration aloud, Katerina stood straight and still in the winter light coming through the open doors, wearing the same plain clothing she'd arrived in, because no one had thought to offer her anything else, and she hadn't asked. Leif stood beside her in his best cloak, which he had insisted on, and held her hand with great solemnity throughout the entire proceeding. Afterward, when the formalities had dissolved into the ordinary movement of people returning to their days, Eric found her standing at the edge of the hall looking out at the courtyard. "How does it feel?" he asked. She considered the question seriously, which he had learned was how she considered most things. "Strange," she said. "Good strange. I'm not certain I know what belonging feels like well enough to recognize it." "You'll learn," he said. "It takes time." She glanced at him sideways. "Is that from experience?" Something shifted in his expression, brief, wry, gone quickly. "I run a territory of several hundred wolves and eat breakfast alone most mornings. Draw your own conclusions." It surprised a laugh out of her. Quiet, genuine, unpracticed, the laugh of someone who hadn't done it often enough for it to come easily. He looked at her when it happened, and looked away before she noticed. They walked in the courtyard that evening, not by arrangement. He had been crossing it on his way to the east tower, and she had been coming from the opposite direction, and they had slowed simultaneously without discussion, and ended up moving along the western wall together in the amber light of torches being lit for the night. It had been happening with increasing frequency these last weeks, unplanned adjacency that neither of them commented on directly. They stopped near the center of the courtyard. The stone where his blade had fallen was indistinguishable from any other stone now. Snow and boots and time had seen to that, but they both knew where they were standing. "That day," Eric said quietly, "I thought strength meant control." Katerina looked at the ground for a moment, then up at him. "What does it mean now?" He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. "It means choosing not to harm," he said, "when harming would be easier." She held that thought carefully, the way she held most things he said these days, with attention, turning it over, finding it solid. Around them, the pack moved through its evening routines. Fires were lit. Children were called in. The river beyond the walls murmured with breaking ice. The sound of a season finally, irrevocably releasing its grip. Katerina stood beside the alpha in the courtyard where his blade had once hovered at her throat, and neither of them moved to leave. They would tell the story for years around their fires, how an alpha raised his blade against an outcast girl, and how mercy, not fear, made him lower it. How the one they had cast out was the one who saved them. How sometimes the bravest thing a ruler can do is simply choose not to harm. And how love, when it comes quietly and earns its way in slowly, through shared mornings and honest words, and a child who calls you warm heart, is the strongest thing there is. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe.